Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about whatever it is that we have decided to talk about. Tonight we're going to talk about child sex trafficking and related subjects. And my guests this evening are Stuart Perrin over here, deucedly interesting man.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah. And Kristina Jones.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to this next hour. Yeah, so how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling ready to go and do this and talk with you about a very important subject.
Of course. I had no idea how important it was until I got your book. And Kristina loaned me her copy, and it's incredible what's going on. And I thought I was up on what's going on anymore. But we'll talk some more about this later on.
Okay.
Unbelievable. And did you tell me how you were?
I'm in great shape, thank you. I'm
Yeah.
happy to see you.
Happy to see you. Just visiting with you in my office at home, just hanging out with you for a few minutes. There's something about you that just feels good. You're so real.
Oh, thank you. I think it's mutual appreciation.
Yeah. And I did call the TA guy and left a message for him, the
Good.
doctor, and hopefully he
Good.
gets back
That's
to me.
wonderful.
Yeah. Small world. So as you know, the show goes in two parts. First part is the bio segment, or getting to know you, who you are. So the viewers will have an idea where you're coming from when you talk about the title of the show and other things. So let's get started on that. And we're going to start with you, Kristina. You ready?
Yes.
If I were to ask your best friend, who is Kristina, what would he or she say? Kristina is what?
A grandmother, a mother, a musician, a spiritual student of this fine man, and most interested in social justice and kindness.
So that's what your best friend would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds like she knows a lot about you. And kindness.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, it even feels good hearing you say that. I see myself sort of in the same vein about wanting to walk the talk instead of having a philosophy or a religious belief about how I should be. And anyhow, enough of that. And your full name is, would you say your first name? You mentioned
It's
it earlier.
Bernsa Kristina Jones.
What kind of a name is that?
Bernsa is a Norwegian name.
Uh-huh.
It's the feminine of Bernt. So you've heard of Bernt. There are a lot of Bernts, mostly in Norway. And the Kristina, she's a Norwegian name too. So I was named for my grandmother. But it's such a hard name, Don, that I've always gone by Kristina.
Uh-huh. Did you have fun in school with it?
Yes, and my brother was particularly merciless. He called me Burnt Toast. And it can still make me
Can
cry.
I call you Bert?
No.
I'm leaving. Love it. Yeah. So, if I ask you a question that you don't want to answer, you don't need to answer, or say get lost or something. Do you have a religious preference? Is that an okay question to ask you?
I think that I don't practice a religion, but I do practice meditation and yoga, which kind of transcends religious teaching, although all religious teachings enter in. So I think you could call me a world citizen. I appreciate, I do belong to the Unitarian Church, but my most deep inner work is my practice of meditation that I've learned from Stuart. And it goes beyond all faiths and goes directly to the source of the divine, however we individually feel that to be. So that's my inner life.
I must confess, since I met with you at home, 2 or 3 times during the day I'll find I need to meditate again. Used to years ago, so you're causing the juices to stir again. I miss it.
I'm glad.
Yeah. And your formal education.
Yes, I have a degree from Portland State, and I'm a musician. I'm a retired opera singer, and sung around the world, and my education was primarily through Gibner King, who was one of the founders of Juilliard School, musically. And I have 6 languages and a really good music education, and I'm completely a blithering idiot in math. But I can count in music.
I don't think we need Stuart for the rest of the hour. You're going to fill it for us. Yeah, delightful, delightful. And you talked about what you did when you were working. Did you mention
In Nepal, you mean?
Across the board? Did you start working when you finished school or what?
Yes, I raised my children as a single mother and began singing professionally, and have sung professionally for more than 40 years.
Okay, that's what you did.
Yeah.
Do you sing anymore?
Yes, in fact, I'm singing at our event on Saturday night, but not as much as I used to. Had a big voice. I was loud. So I did Wagner and Verdi around our country and in Europe and Asia.
God. I think I'm going to drag my whole crew with me to come see you.
Very kind, thank you.
Yeah. Partner, husband, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever.
I've been married a couple of times. I'm not good at it.
Hey, maybe you're so good you want to try it twice. All right.
Well, you should never say no, right?
Right. Any children or grandchildren?
Yes, I have 2 children. Nancy, who will be 53 this year, lives in Sacramento.
Mm-hmm.
And my son Todd lives here. And 6 grandchildren between 15 and 25. Mm-hmm. It's a delightful group.
Do you see yourself on the political spectrum, left, right, center, or sometimes people don't like to answer that question?
I'm definitely to the left.
Uh-huh.
I'm all for freedom of thought and social justice. I really love and respect our country. I think our country is fantastic. And I really am sorry that so much is blindsided in our contemporary culture. But I think overall I'm a centrist. I just really lean to the left pretty seriously.
Mm-hmm. Shall we do Kumbaya now or wait a little longer? You can throw it at me too. It goes 2 ways or 3 ways here. I mean, memberships in political, social, or civic organizations worth mentioning for the viewers.
I think our Little Sisters Foundation is my chief interest.
And we'll be talking about that some.
Yes. And I also have worked for the Democratic Party through the years. I worked for Obama. I worked for McGovern. I'm an old girl, and I was a bra burner, too.
Oh, wow. Hard to follow here. So let's switch over now and talk to Stuart, okay?
Here I am.
And I have a trick question for you. Shall I ask it now or later on?
Your pleasure, whenever.
My pleasure. Okay. Since you already know the trick question for her, I'll skip that one and find another one for you later on. Okay. And when and where were you born?
I was born in the Bronx, New York.
Uh-huh.
Was raised there until I was 18 when I left home. I grew up in the South Bronx. I grew up in a very interesting neighborhood.
Uh-huh.
It was a multiracial, multi-ethnic neighborhood that became one of the worst slums in New York City, or worst slums in the country, actually, the
Really?
South Bronx. Yeah.
When was that? When were you born?
I was born in 1942.
42.
Right. And I spent 18 years of my life living there. I went to integrated schools and kind of lived in early age colorblind, never understood all the hoopla about race and prejudice and all this stuff, because all my friends, I used to play on basketball teams,
Uh-huh.
and it was a interracial basketball teams, and we would play together all the time.
And your parents didn't teach you to hate people because of their color?
There was a certain kind of trepidation having to do with race, but people had to live with it, and I would go out of the house and go to the schoolyard and play with Latinos and blacks and Jews and Italians and Irish, and it was just a big mixture of people.
Yeah.
So the kind of minor league prejudice that I heard at home never affected me, because I had to, every day of my life, just open to all kinds of individuals and people and every one of them taught me something, you know. And I used to love to play basketball, and I was pretty good at it as a kid. So I would go out and play with the best I could find, and it usually was in the black neighborhoods. I could find the best people to play against. You know?
Is there something genetic about that?
I don't know if there's something genetic about it.
I'm teasing you. Anything significant about your cultural or national heritage worth mentioning beyond what you've said so far?
Well, I was raised in a Jewish family, and it was kind of Jewish in a wonderful way. It wasn't Orthodox or deeply religious. It was Jewish by identification and association. I mean, bagels and lox kind of Jewish, you know? Every Sunday morning we'd have bagels and herring and lox on the table. And, you know, and more by people kind of living in communities, because the very neighborhood I lived in, the block I lived in, was mostly a Jewish block. So there was that. But the wonderful thing is that you had to go out of the neighborhood to go to school. So then you had to really, you know, open up and deal with people of all kinds of races and religions. And you had to open and learn from them and learn what they had to teach you about your own life. So it was very interesting upbringing, you know, because at home I lived in a kosher household. Because my grandmother lived there, and she was a very religious Jewish woman, and she was wonderful. She lived to 92 years old, 93 years old, and I'll never forget. This is a great story. They put, you know, when she was 92 years old, I came home, you know, and I went to my aunt's house, where at that time she was living, and she was making a Passover ceremony for 20 people. At 92 years old.
92. Oh,
and I looked at her and I said, Grandma, I said, you know, sit down and take a rest. She said, I'm too busy. I'm too busy. Well, anyway, about a year later, she broke a hip, and they had to put her in a nursing home. And she was like a juvenile delinquent in this nursing home. And they wound up throwing her out of the nursing home.
They did.
Yeah. She was creating too much trouble. She said, I can't live here. It's impossible. I can't live in this place. Well, anyway, she got very sick, and she went to the hospital, and they pronounced her dead. You know, the doctors pronounced her dead. And about a minute later, or half a minute later, she came back to life again, and they pronounced her alive. And she began to talk about seeing her husband in the cosmos, and the souls of her relatives and parents and her husband, and the white light she saw. And she said the funniest thing I ever heard in my life. She said, you know, Stuart, she said, you know, they don't want me in the cosmos. They sent me back here. There's nothing for me to do on the earth. I mean, it was the absolute existential existence, you know. There was nowhere for her to go. I mean, it was completely incredible. And I have never forgotten that. I'll never forget that. I said, you know, we all are a bunch of existential beings.
Yeah.
You know, and we have to learn to live and be centered no matter where we live, and learn how to make it work.
About what percentage of us are successful at that?
It's a very low percentage, Don. I meet thousands of people every year. I give lectures all over the country, all over the place. And the one thing that people refuse to do is to learn how to get centered, learn how to get balance inside themselves, and how to build a system that enables them to be able to do the dance of life without the dance of life destroying them. And this is something that one has to work on themselves to achieve, to build that foundation inside that enables them to do it. Now, when I was a kid, when I was 18 to about 25, you know, my spiritual practice started when I was 16 years old. And it started when my father died. You know, I went to the hospital. I was in Miami with my mother.
And you were 16?
I was 16. We were on the beach, and we got a telephone call that my father was very sick in the hospital. So we went home. And we went to the hospital. He was lying in bed, and he was shaking. And he had 106 fever, and he was just in a coma. He didn't know my mother, my sister, myself. And this went on for like a week. And one day I walked into his room, and he was lying in the bed, totally quiet, completely calm. And I looked into his eyes and I could see 1,000 miles. I could see forever. It was infinite. The whole room, hospital room, was full of light. And I took his hand and I said, "Do you know me?" And he said, "Yes." And we sat that way for maybe about a half hour. And I got up and I had to leave. I left the room for a minute. And I met his nurse in the hallway. And I said to her, "What is going on in there?" And she said to me something that so deeply affected me. She said, in her experience, just before people leave the world, they enter a state of total serenity. And I said to myself, then my father died like an hour later or something. And I said to myself, why did he have to wait 49 years to get this state of serenity? And I said, I have to find somebody who can teach me how to do this. And from the age of 16 to 25, I went half around the world looking for yogis and rishis and priests and imams, and it didn't matter. Anyone who had something to teach.
To Asia too?
I was always on my way to India. I never quite got there. I went to Africa. I lived in Europe for 5 years. And I was basically your indigenous hippie. I just stuck my thumb out, and I would travel everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And I did this for almost, I would say, since 18 to about 25 years old.
I bet you've got some stories about those
Oh, boy,
times.
I could tell you a story. But anyway, the funny thing about all this is looking for a spiritual teacher half around the world. I wound up coming back to New York when I was about 25 years old. I was completely broke. And I was living on the floor of a friend of mine's apartment on 21st Street between 8th and 9th Avenue, which at that time was a complete slum in Manhattan. Today it's high-rent district,
Mm-hmm.
And he said to me one day, he said, "Let's go out and have some dinner." It was about 5 o'clock in the evening. So I said, okay. So we went and we walked down into Greenwich Village, and we walked past an Oriental antique store. And we were looking in the window, and it was full of all these Buddhas and paintings of beautiful things, expensive things.
Mm-hmm.
And this friend of mine said to me, "Well, why don't we go in there and look? You love this stuff. You always talk about, Hinduism, Buddhism." So I said to him, "Charlie, I'm broke. What am I going to do in there?" He said to me something, again, these things that you never forget. "It doesn't cost to look." So we went in, and standing in the center of this antique gallery was a man that I was drawn to like a magnet. And he started talking to me about his spiritual life. He started showing me pictures of himself.
Just volunteered to start talking to you.
Yeah, he just started talking to me about pictures of himself studying with his spiritual teacher in India. And he said to me after all this, he said, "If you want to come study with me, come back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock. And as I was walking out of his gallery, I turned around and looked at him. And it was the first time in 9 years I saw the same light that I had seen in my father's hospital room coming out of this man. And I said to this friend of mine, "I got to go study with him. I don't know what this guy is, but he has certainly, one meeting has affected me profoundly." So we went out, we had dinner. Now this is a true story.
Mm-hmm.
And after dinner, we walked back to this friend of mine's apartment. We're walking up the stairs, and we meet a guy in the hallway who said, "Why don't you come into my apartment and have some tea?" So we said, "Great, okay, we'll come in." I didn't even know the guy, I had seen him in the hallway, but never really knew. We walked into his apartment. He had a $500,000 Oriental art collection in his apartment. And I'm talking, we're living in a railroad flat with a bathtub in the kitchen and a toilet in the hallway. And he had sculptures and paintings. I said, "Where did you get all this stuff?" And he said, "There's a guy in Greenwich Village named Rudy." And Rudy was the man that I had met an hour and a half before. And I said to myself, "Stuart, for all these years you've been listening to yourself, and you've made yourself half crazy. It's about time you start listening to something of a higher nature. You have to go meet this person." And when I met him, it was like this man literally gave me a training that enabled me to connect with God. He completely transformed and saved my life.
Yeah. What is God? Tell me, what is God?
That's one question I cannot answer. God
If you see the Buddha on the road, you should kill him.
No, God is not the Buddha, but is the Buddha. God is not religion, but is religion. God is not spirituality, but is. God is the path and not the path. God is everything. It is every single manifestation of energy that exists in the universe. And the only way one can get to that energy is you have to let go of yourself. You have to be free of yourself.
What do you mean by spiritual or spirit?
Once you get free of yourself, then the universe can guide your life. And that is spirit.
Is it an experiencing that's unique?
No, it's unique and it's not unique. It's unique and it's so commonplace that it's simply drinking a little bit of water.
Does the neocortex get in the way of my experiencing?
What gets in the way is this. That's what gets in the way.
The brain.
The mind, which knows everything and knows nothing, and has all the answers and none of the answers, and is making everybody crazy. That's what gets in the way. That's the only thing that gets in the way. And along with it is the emotions, which are like quicksand. And they really also get people completely neurotic inside. And then if you put sexuality in this equation, you have the local insane asylum.
Mr. Director, we're going to need 3 hours, not just one. This is terrific. Continuing on here. So we ask you when you were born and where. Why were you born, Stuart?
I've been asking that question now for 70 years. I really have. I guess I was born to just, actually to ultimately become nothing and become a servant for spirit, to nurture people and help people to find a way of transforming their unhappiness and their sadness into something that connects them with joy and love and, as Chris said, kindness. There are two things. There's wisdom. You cannot receive wisdom if you're full of yourself. Once you get free of yourself, the wisdom comes like the trumpets in Handel's Messiah. It comes out of the universe. And then we have to live here. And there's compassion for human beings, for the suffering that goes on in this world, for the difficulties of life. And I guess if I have any purpose, it's to really try to allow this wisdom to come through me and touch whoever wants to be touched by it. I can't do it for everybody, but there are people that do want to be touched for it, and I am there to help them.
Am I touchable?
Yes, deeply touchable, Don. I mean, I couldn't talk to you this way if you weren't really touchable inside yourself. And I mean that.
Thank you. I know you do. The two of you, oh my gosh, I'm going to be walking on the crowd when I leave here tonight. It's just wonderful. We have to have some more contact beyond what's going on here this evening, if I may, yes. And as you were talking a few times, I felt my shoulders drop because the tension was going away, just as I was listening to your story, what you were saying. And with all of those senses operating, there was still some other sense that says that I can't define, but it's beyond what's that defined or recognizable. I experience it, I feel. And that. Let's continue on. So that's the meat of this program.
That's so beautiful, though,
Yeah.
Don. Thank you.
And you've been doing this sort of thing for all of your working life?
I've been doing spiritual practice since I'm 16 years old. I've been doing this Kundalini yoga practice since I'm 25 years old.
What is Kundalini yoga?
I'll tell you some funny stories, okay? People ask me that question. I say Kundalini is just like Italian ice cream. It's really, you can't take it seriously. It's just But I'll tell you the funny story. The first time I ever heard the word Kundalini, okay? I was 18 years old and I was working at a child's coffee shop in Manhattan on 59th Street and Lexington Avenue. And the manager of the coffee shop was a Puerto Rican guy, very elegant guy, who he and I would sit and talk about Buddhism and Hinduism and spirituality on our breaks.
Sure.
We would have, like, we'd have some food and we'd talk about these things. One day, I'd been working there maybe a month. He looks at me with this very mysterious look on his face and he says, "You know anything about Kundalini?" So I looked at him and I said, "I've seen the word in books, but I have no idea what it is," I told him. Second time I heard the word Kundalini, I was living on the left bank in Paris, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And I had a lot of hippie and bohemian friends and artists and writers. We were all friends there. And there was one guy who was kind of a little bit, I would say, out to lunch, this guy,
Sure.
And we were walking down the back streets of the left bank on these little side streets about 3 o'clock in the morning. And he got down on his knees and he raised his arms up in the sky and he said, "Oh, sacred Kundalini in the sky." I really mean this. And I looked at him like, what? The third time I heard the word Kundalini, I'd been studying with my teacher for a year. And he said to me, "Do you know what the yoga we do is called? The kind of meditation practice we do?" I said, "Rudy, I have no idea. The only thing I know is that it works, and I don't care what it's called." He said, "We do Kundalini yoga." This is the third time I heard the word Kundalini. And he said, "Stuart, don't worry about it." He said, "I was teaching this 10 years. And somebody said to me, 'Do you know the kind of meditation you do?'"
You're breaking me up.
I mean, he said, "It's Kundalini yoga." So, like Shakespeare said, "A rose by any other name smells just as sweetly. And Kundalini by any other name, when practiced properly, it just gives one a connection with spirit. And it doesn't even matter what it's called. It's probably the most ancient form of meditation in the world today. It goes back tens of thousands of years, this meditation practice. But the only reason I've ever done it is not because it was Kundalini. It works. It helped me transform my craziness into a spiritual life. It helped me to be able to live in the world and learn how to get free of the world at exactly the same time. And that was the only reason I did it. I didn't care what it was called.
We got to do some more of this beyond this recording this show. Let me take care of a few more things I want to cover with you before we get into the meat of the program. Your formal education, anything about that's worth
I went to the New
citing?
School. I got a degree from the New School for Social Research and Humanities. It took me 10 years to get it. Between going to Europe, and I studied acting when I was younger, and going to Europe and doing all the things I did. I wanted to be a writer even from the earliest ages, and I would write poetry and stuff. And then I went and I finally got a degree. And I didn't get a degree to get an education. I really got a degree because I needed to learn how to finish things and to complete cycles. And I used to go into school and I always knew better than the teachers. And one day I went to class and I said, "No, Stuart, listen to them. Learn from them. You don't know better than them. They're just people struggling with their own lives." And when I began to do that, it changed everything. And I really learned how to finish a cycle that was a very important cycle to finish. And I was able to move on, from that cycle. And I also graduated. I got a degree. They said, "You want recommendations to any graduate school, you can get it. Wherever you want to go, we'll recommend you." I graduated very, very well from the school that I went to.
Yeah.
But the reason I was able to do it is I started listening to them and learning from them, and not so much what they were teaching, but them as human beings. So I was able to make friends with them and open to them and let them be, instead of me knowing better than they do,
A partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, one of those. You have one of those, or two
Yeah,
or three of those?
I have somebody I live with, a very dear woman. I have a daughter who's 18 years old, who is becoming an incredible kid. I'm just crazy about how she's changed in the last year and a half.
Look right at the camera and tell her how you feel about her.
Ania, I love you to death. That's how I feel about you, and I'm so proud of what you're doing with your life and what's going on in your life and how mature you're becoming and deep about your life. It's remarkable. It's remarkable what you're doing. And that's for you, dear.
I think she believes you. We will skip the political persuasion because I think I know what your answer would be. How about memberships in political, social, or civic organizations? Any of those come to mind for you right now?
No, I'm pretty apolitical, Don.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really am. And I believe in humanity, and I believe that things have to be done to help raise the level of humanity. I don't know if politics is going to do it. I really mean that. I do what I can, like this Little Sisters Foundation and this book I've written and all that stuff, to do my part in helping to raise the level of what it means to be a human being.
I have one more question before we take a break and go to the main part of the show. Persons from the past or alive today that you particularly admired or admire or looked up to, either one of you. Any names come to mind for you that you look up to or admire persons?
Well, there are people in the past. I mean, Gandhi, Martin Luther King.
Yes.
People like that are very deeply. I very deeply admire.
All right, that settles that because they're going to yell at me. We've got to take a break. And then we'll come back and talk about child sex trafficking and little sisters. Please, Mr. E, break time. Something. Hello, I think we're back again. And thanks for staying tuned. And for your viewers who missed the opening of the show because you were channel surfing or goofing around, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. It's an ongoing series of 1 hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests, like my guest here this evening. And we're talking about child sex trafficking. And the first half of the show that you probably missed was talking about who they are personally. And in the second half, as we talk about child sex trafficking and the book Little Sisters, you'll learn some more about who these two wonderful human beings are. And I'm having one heck of a good time, as good a time as I've ever had in my 15 years of doing this show. And thank you again for coming on. So I have a few questions to start the ball rolling here. I'm not sure I need to ask any questions, but I asked you what is Kundalini Yoga. And I'm not sure I want to ask you any more questions. Yes, I do. What is deep meditation practice? What is that, deep meditation practice?
Well, I can answer that very simply. We have inside us a system that is called chakras, energy centers. They're located in different parts of the body. There's one here, one in the throat, heart, below the navel, sex, base of the spine, top of the head. This system of energy centers is a direct link to higher energy in the universe. And meditation, as we teach it, as we practice it, is about learning to get the mind, which is really the biggest troublemaker, focused in this chakra that's right below the navel. Because this center here in a human being is the center of balance. This is the foundation. The Chinese call this qi. Mm-hmm. The Koreans call this qi. The Japanese, they call it the tatien. Japanese call this the hara. And in Hinduism, it's called the third chakra. And it also has another long Sanskrit name, which I don't even know. But by bringing the mind, which is the most powerful instrument we have, and focusing it in this area and keeping it focused there, what we begin to do is build the foundation and the balance inside us. The foundation and balance enables us to open the heart. You know, it's like a flower. It needs a stem, it needs roots, it needs to be able to draw nourishment out of the earth. This is the roots. And then the stem connects to the heart. The heart can open and stay open. The heart is the seat of love, it's the seat of joy, it's the seat of gratitude. It's really the thing that makes us human on the highest levels. You know, joy, happiness are a byproduct of the heart. So then when the heart is open and this is open, all of that stuff, you know, I always compare it to it's like a bird cage full of singing canaries, you know, that never shuts up. All of that stuff begins to come down, and instead of killing us and creating tension, it begins to expand the foundation inside us. And then that expansion allows energy then to move through the sexual area to the base of the spine, where it activates the force of Kundalini. And Kundalini is like a rocket ship inside people. It's a direct link between the human level and spirit, higher energy. So as the Kundalini is activated, because we have foundation, we have the heart open, we have the mind quiet, you know, we begin to get a connection with spiritual energy. That connection allows the energy to come back, and it begins to guide our lives. And that's what meditation is all about.
I have some prompting questions here, and I don't think I would need to mention them. If you want to wing it from here, or shall I ask you some of these questions?
Ask.
What has inspired you to start Little Sisters Foundation? We have that under your name on a panel. What is the Little Sisters Foundation? Well, you want to start talking about that?
I can start it, then Chris can continue. And when back in the early 90s, 92, my job in the world was setting up meditation centers all over the world. I was going to the Middle East, all over Europe, South America, all over the United States, and I was traveling to all these places and helping to create meditation centers. And one day in New York, where I used to earn a living because I used to sell Asian art, and I had galleries in New York. And I was approached by a couple of my students who said, why don't we set up a meditation center in Kathmandu?
In Kathmandu?
Yeah, and I said to them, what a great idea. I said, we have taken so much out of India, Nepal, Buddhism, Hinduism, we can go there and give something back. So I went to Chris, and she was at that time, teaching meditation. Where was it? In California, right?
San Francisco.
San Francisco. And I said, Chris, would you like to go live in Kathmandu? And Chris said, great, I'll go.
Like that?
Yeah, like that. I'm talking like that. She said, great, I'll go. So we set up a center in Kathmandu, and it was very successful. We had people who crossed all the caste systems, and we had Tibetans and Nawars and all kinds of Hindus, and every kind of people were coming to this center. And Chris calls me one day and says, Stuart, I really love this place. It's the most exotic place I've ever been. I said, I don't know what to do with my time during the day. And I said to her, Chris, you're living in one of the poorest countries in the world. Something's going to come. 2 days later, I get a phone call in New York. I went to a meeting at the United Nations. She went to a meeting at the United Nations, Women's Organization. The meeting was about the fact that to that point in 1992, over 200,000 children, girls, have been trafficked into sexual slavery from Nepal to India.
200,000?
200,000, yes. Up to the point of 1992. Excuse me. And every year, at least 10,000 children are trafficked from Nepal to India. So I said, Chris, that's our work. We have to set up a safe house. And we set up a safe house, and we worked with doctors and NGOs to target children that were prime in the that could be easily trafficked.
Where do you get funding for all these activities?
Well, we started a foundation in the United States called the Baham Foundation.
Okay.
And we raised money, and that's a whole other story about raising money. But anyway, we started this thing, and we also not only had children, Nepalese children that came from the hinterlands of Nepal, we also had children and women living in there that were kicked out of brothels in Mumbai. And they all had AIDS and they had all kinds of problems, And I'd like to turn it over to Chris because she was really on there doing it, and she can tell you more about this.
Please.
The people that we worked with were a wonderful group, Don. They were the people that I met at the United Nations Women's Organization. Were a group of feminine doctors, women who had been trained and were physicians. And they had decided to start a group because they had heard about sex trafficking of kids. And they're very successful. They are called Rural Health and Education Service Trust of Nepal, or REST. They're still in existence.
Say that again.
Rural Health and Education Service Trust of Nepal. And they're a group of 8 women doctors. And what they were doing was trying to educate young girls and women in the far out areas in Nepal where those girls were being trafficked because they were exotic looking and beautiful and often musicians and dancers and different. And they were being trafficked by their families often, their parents, who were very impoverished. It was a question of money and of large families. So the girls would be trafficked by perhaps a parent, a father or brother, and sold to a trafficker or an agent who would secrete them across the border and into the brothels, where they would be raped, tortured in many ways, and broken into a life of prostitution. These kids were between 12 and 15 years of age, and they often, because they were servicing about 19 guys a day, had lots of STDs and were becoming HIV positive. And at that time, if the girl became HIV positive, the madam called the Garvali, or house mother, would send the kid home, which she couldn't go home. She would be stranded on the streets. Her parents didn't want her. She was like Kleenex, thrown away from society.
So they'd gotten rid of her before
did.
She was trafficked.
Yes, so our goal was to rescue girls before they were trafficked. And we were very successful. We had medical camps, and we would go into the outlying areas in Nepal, and these doctors would put on medical camps. We would talk to teachers and policemen to identify families that had sold kids, and they were good at that. And so we took some of them into our home, where we had a place in Kathmandu, and put some in school, and then eventually we started the first safe house that we had in Nepal.
In your home?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And the thing is that, you see, there's an element in this that the average income in the hinterlands of Nepal in 1992, and I'd imagine it's not much different today, was about $15 to $20 a year. A year.
15 to 20 bucks a year.
Yeah.
Oh.
And
Yeah.
the families had anywhere from 4 to 12 children in a family. And girls had less value than a water buffalo.
Or a
Because
chicken.
or a chicken. A water buffalo they would use to plow the fields
Yeah.
because they lived on a sustainable income. And the kids, the girls, they had to get dowries for. If the girl was not married, she was a disgrace to the family. And when she became married, they never saw her again. She would go live with the stepmother, or the mother-in-law, or the husband's mother, and literally become a slave of the mother-in-law. So it was a horrible situation. So the parents, some trafficker would come.
And this is part of the culture.
Yes.
And offer them $200 in rupees for a girl. And they would sell the kids. And they would tell the family, we'll bring her to India, she'll work in a factory,
Yeah.
she'll be a nanny,
She'll have a
she'll
job.
send you, and then they would bring her to these brothels. Like nobody, places like Falkland Road in Mumbai are surreal. They're beyond all human comprehension. And they would bring her to these places on Falkland Road where all these brothels are. And they would, as Chris said, torture her, rape her,
Brutalize them.
brainwash her, drug her, transform her into a machine that slept with 20 men a day. And it was unbelievable, you know. And when I heard about this, I began to hear stories like this. It's what made me write my book, Little Sisters. I said, to me, it was not even prostitution per se. It's what is being done to these children to turn them into machines. And I said, this has got to be the most horrific crime at that time going on in the 20th century, and it's still going on in the 21st century.
So there's no exaggeration. These.
No. It's very, very factual.
This
very
book
factual.
is factual. And the reason I wrote it the way I wrote it is it had to be palatable. So I made it into a love story, a novel, an adventure story, a family story, you know, a multicultural story.
Yeah.
I had to do that because if I just wrote, 200 pages of kids nobody would read the book.
Of course.
But this way, people are guided into really what takes place. And in all the events that Chris and I have been doing in the United States, we have met people from the FBI, detectives, DAs, all kinds of Congress people. Everybody has told us that everything I talk about in this book is exactly what is going on in this country, except I'm talking about it in India,
And so our experience of what happened to the kids, and really, Don, the most horrendous thing is that the kids are now, in that part of the world, are continue to work and die of AIDS. And meanwhile, they've infected all these people. But when we've been talking, Stuart and I, with the local police in Portland, Oregon, they have told us in our descriptions of exactly what we witnessed there. That is exactly what happens here. Exactly.
In this country?
In this country.
Portland,
In
Oregon.
Portland?
That's right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Putting cigarettes out on a girl, brutalizing them.
Now, that must happen in rare instances here. Is it more than just a rarity?
Don, there are 200,000 children that are sexual slaves in this country. There's more slavery now in the world than there was before the Civil War. 27 million people on the planet Earth are living in bondage today in slavery. And many of them are sexual slaves, then they have work slaves. And I'm talking about a bigger amount of slavery today than before the Civil War.
Why is that?
It's a big business.
Money.
It's a $32 billion a year industry. That is why it is.
What can we do about it as
we're trying to,
human beings?
Well, this is what Chris and I, we're trying to raise consciousness and let people know that this is going on in Portland, it's going on in Eugene, it's going on in Westchester County, where I just did 3 events with the police, and we're talking about how children are being trafficked up in Westchester County, New York. Mm-hmm. I'm talking Scarsdale,
Yes.
I mean, these are really rich communities, and children are being trafficked in these places. And Pound Ridge,
In the last 2 or 3 days, Don, there's been a lot on media about a Lake Oswego high school student cheerleader who has been soliciting kids in her high school. And one of the girls turned her in, and she's been incarcerated.
Lake Oswego, Oregon.
Yes.
That's a very classy suburb of Portland.
Mm-hmm.
Unbelievable.
It is.
How come we're
It's a
not hearing more
tragedy.
about this in the mainstream media?
Well, we're hearing more about it than when we did it in 1992 to fix 6. You couldn't get 3 people. People would say to us, I don't believe this is going on in the world.
Yeah.
I can't, even in Nepal, I'll never forget, it's their karma. Their next lifetime will be better. Mm-hmm. We used to hear stuff like this.
Gosh.
We don't believe this is going on in the world.
It's too far away. It has nothing to do with us.
That's right. But today it's getting closer to everybody, and people are starting to respond in a much better way.
And what we're doing is working to help raise consciousness, bring awareness to the public at large, and also to start to establish programs with the agencies on the ground that are working to help these girls. The Portland Police Bureau has told us there are an estimated 2,000 girls involved in prostitution in Portland and 1,000 pimps. And it's a big business, and it's a tragedy.
Oh my gosh. So there are some organizations that are working to do something
Yes.
about this.
Very good ones.
Also people always ask me, what can we do? And that in many ways is a way of saying, I really can't do anything. When I heard from Chris what was going on, I was half a world away. I said, Chris, this is what we can do. I was so outraged by the idea of children being used this way. I said, I have to do something. Now, I think people have to get outraged. And I think there's another element to this that I am discovering, and I've only discovered this over the last few months. The real problem is dysfunction in families. This is the real problem. That children today, 12 years old, 14 years old, they're not getting that love, that nurturing, that feeling of home, that they can go and talk to their parents, they can be loved by because the families today, both in this country and around the world, are so dysfunctional that kids are going out on the streets looking for some kind of answer. And these pimps play on this, and then the media teaches them, beautiful clothing and elegant, and, you can be, all these models and all the stuff they get from the media. So the pimps provide them with jewelry and clothing and, you can be beautiful and wonderful hair and all this stuff. And the kids fall right into that trap. And I think, to me, this is something that has to be addressed, because it's not something that's over there. It's right in the homes of just about every single person. Like even on the back of my book, I say, when children, regardless of their religion, ethnicity, or race, are subjected to sexual slavery, the entire world has to take responsibility for this, because this is something that's emanating directly out of the dysfunction of families.
Oh, well, we can go on for a lot longer, but we're running out of time. We've got about 3 minutes or so left. What can we say directly to the viewers that would be important for them to hear you guys saying to them now? What can the viewers do in this situation?
No, Chris, maybe you can.
That's your camera there. Talk to that one.
What we can do is become aware that this is a worldwide scourge against humanity. We can become operative in telling people that it's going on. We can really help kids understand the danger. We can send police and helpers into the malls, get them on the internet, talk about it. So it isn't under the table, it's an under the table scourge.
And can I just interject something?
Please, of course.
Two things, okay?
Yes.
First of all, I really feel that people have to take this personally. Everybody has children and grandchildren. And you never know when these children and grandchildren are going to be approached by people in the streets and shopping malls. And people have to really understand their responsibility and what it takes to raise a child and what it takes to truly love a child and to provide a child with the security that they don't have to go looking for pimps to be loved. And there's a second element. When I go to do these events, it's almost like preaching to the choir. And about a month ago, I said to Chris, the real victims are kids between 13 and 18 years old. And we have to start doing something, and maybe your viewing public can help us. Mm-hmm. But what we plan on doing is we're going to get together with the music world, and we're going to start producing concerts geared towards benefit concerts, geared towards children between 13 and 18 years old. And we want to interject within these concerts, education about human trafficking. So they come and they hear their favorite bands and their favorite music and they have a great time. At the same time, they can get an education. They can learn about human trafficking. Now, this is something that if your viewers want to contribute to and help with, we'd be more than open to listen to anybody who has ideas to help us get this project done.
What's the website they should go to?
Yes.
Yes.
Little Sisters Foundation?
Yes.
.org, yes.
Please.
.org.
Please care. Please give us your heart and ideas, please.
It's been delightful.
And also, the last thing is we're doing an event tomorrow. Oh, well, actually, this is going to be televised later, but...
Yeah, and talk about the event anyhow.
Well, we're going to do an event at the First Unitarian Church in downtown Portland from 3 to 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock, right? And it's, there's going to be the state attorney is going to be on this speaking. Carolyn Tomei is an assemblywoman, is going to be speaking.
She's a delightful human being.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so it's going to be
Ujifusa.
J.R. Ujifusa is going to be speaking, and Chris and I are going to be involved. And so we're doing this event, and it's an awareness-raising event, and we would love for people to attend,
Yeah.
It's a community forum and should be very good.
When this is broadcast, by God, it'll be over by then. But,
The situation won't
it's
be
going to be
over.
good, and I'll report to you, my viewers, later on about how it went tomorrow night. So again, it's been just delightful, and let's stay in touch some more.
Please, thank you for
Yeah.
having us.
Thank you,
Thank
Don.
you so much. Any PSAs, Mr. E, before we stop here? So to get my shows, the broadcast schedule, go to my website and click on present day activities. The broadcast schedule is available there. And to watch my shows on the web, go to www.donbaham.com, click on favorite links. You can also get my shows on Don Baham YouTube. I should have upgraded that panel. And the American Civil Liberties Union, we need the ACLU because our civil liberties are going down the tubes too fast. Go to the ACLU and see about joining and what they're about, the American Civil Liberties Union. To get my shows broadcast by other stations around the country, ask your local public access station to go to pegmedia.org and follow the instructions on how to have my shows broadcast in local communities around the country. And to end corporate personhood, which we've got to do, go to move-to-amend.org. We've got to amend the Constitution to do something about the Citizens United and the McCutcheon decision. We've got to take our country back. Yeah. Thanks for watching. I made it. And I hope you had as good a time as I did. And remember KFC. KFC is very important. Not Kentucky Fried Chicken. Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind. And be friendly. And be charitable. To you too. And you too. And you too. And you too. Thanks again for watching. Good night.